Maybe we should have a moment's silence, really, for the absolute eradication of any pretense that this man has to be an actual responsible politician.
I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
Oddly enough, in a disgusting way, Farage is right, but not in the way he means, which is something terrible has happened to this country, I think.
Yeah.
And it's that someone like him, who's now a high-profile MP, leader of a party that's represented in the Commons,
yeah,
and was, as it were, the star of the recent general election campaign, breakout star, can say something so absolutely disgraceful. Note he didn't say it in the House of Commons when Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, made her statement on the murders. But the fact that the content of what he said is really, really damaging. And without getting immediately into sort of jargon, there's a term that has become used quite a lot in America, and it's very useful in the context of this week, and it's stochastic terrorism. Now that sounds like a jargon, but what it means is and I think it came out of the Trump use of language, is the incitement of political violence by vague, ambiguous or deniable language, just asking questions.
So what was that word again?
Stochastic.
Stochastic.
Yes, right. Stochastic.
And what's the sort of etymology of
I don't know what
but
it's used a lot in the American discourse,
right.
and I think it deserves to enter the lingo here, because what Farage is doing here is hijacking an incident, the character of which we don't know yet, but at that stage was just simply a horror. Yeah, that's all it was, and trying to sort of build it into his own selfish political narratives.
The vile cynicism of it is beyond the pale. It really is.
And he wasn't alone. Ben Habib, his deputy,
another absolute tosspot,
absolutely said, I think it was on Talk, that this proved that multiculturalism and immigration had gone too far. And it
so you can add that strange woman, Catherine Burblesing. The head teacher. She describes herself as Britain's strictest headmistress. On Twitter, she starts going on about, Southport clearly demonstrates that multiculturalism has failed. She's never fucking been to Southport, right? I grew up 5 miles from Southport. Yeah. I worked on the Southport Visitor. Every summer, I worked on Southport Fairground as a kid, right? I know Southport like the back of my hand. The office of the Southport Visitor was, 3 streets away from the street where this tragedy happened. Southport is the most, it's not genteel, it's not violent, it's not monocultural, it's not multicultural. It is just normal English culture, right? It is a mix of people.
A normal place.
It's a seaside town. Yes. It's the kind of place that Morrissey wrote about. It's got that air of faded glory, but it's a nice place full of great, good-hearted people, right? It really, honestly, people, I might sound like I'm boring on a bit here, but the northwest of England is a friendly place. Yeah. Right? It really is. And you saw Southport in the clean-up after those absolute wankers turned up the next day to hijack the memorial to those girls. The brickies and the guys who came out with their brushes and the glaziers who fixed up the mosque, that beautiful leader of the mosque guy who came so eloquent, so calm, so dignified, who had been literally terrorized by these imbeciles the night before, most of whom I would guess, although I don't know, had been drafted in from far away. You could hear the accents on the video. Yes. They weren't Scouse accents, they weren't Southport accents, they were from God knows where. But they'd been drafted in for a piss-up and a row and a fight. And there's a great local newspaper called the Liverpool Post now, not to be confused with the old Daily Post, which is, and they had some great reportage from the streets, including witnessing a bunch of these lads saying, right, let's go smash up the mosque.
Yes.
Now, that's what it's about. And Farage, sorry for ranting, I am, but I feel super strongly about this.
The right response.
Farage, sitting there in this office of his, talking about some reports suggest, when he says some reports, he's talking about Andrew fucking Tate.
It's very much like Trump's people are saying.
People are saying, I've heard
questions
this.
are being asked. It's,
and it to call it irresponsible is
beyond that.
It's way beyond that.
It's way beyond that. I mean,
calculated, cynical, nasty, divisive hatred.
Well, what's the playbook of the far right? That we know that the playbook is, you don't need to win the argument. You just need to sow enough doubt so no one believes anything. So there's no trust.
Yeah.
You don't need to win battles in the street. You just need enough so there's chaos.
Yeah.
This is what they are trying to do. And then you present yourself, paradoxically, as the answer to the chaos with authoritarian solutions. So what happened? There was, as you say, there was this appalling riot. Clearly, at the very least, stirred up by outside agent provocateur. I mean, you know, we don't know yet, but there have been arrests. It was initially attributed to the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson's outfit. Actually, the EDL has ceased to exist really in its old form. I think it's much more now a kind of network of groups like Patriotic Alliance and so on. And crucially, as you were saying, this capacity of social media and disinformation on social media, and Signal in particular as a sort of like WhatsApp, to mobilise mobs at very, very short notice, sort of pop-up violence, basically. Yeah. And you had a number of key accounts, and there's been some very good analysis done of it. Robinson himself, Darren Grimes, Andrew Tate, a strange account called Channel 3 Now, another account called Europe Invasion. And they accounted for a huge amount of the traffic on this. And they were just churning out made-up stuff.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Tate did a video in his car saying, as fact, he came off a boat last year. He's been monitored by MI5 or MI6. He's an immigrant. He's and then he starts going, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
The manhood of Britain stands aside while this kind of stuff happens, you know, while little kids get killed. What are you going to do about it? You know, I mean, it couldn't be more insightful. If you tried.
I mean, it was
Darren fucking Grimes, by the way.
Yeah.
Absolute no mark. You know, what place has he got to be whipping this kind of stuff up?
None at all. But the problem is that there are people at the other end of those tweets and posts who listen, and they come to communities like Southport, and they just tear it to pieces. And as you say, the good local people had to tidy up afterwards. But I think this was a really, really big moment, actually. And the fact that it then spread to Whitehall and Hartlepool and Manchester so quickly is deeply alarming, because it shows how quickly a sort of series of riots, which are actually unconnected. I mean, there's no connective tissue between what happened in this terrible slaughter of kids, but this weird agenda of, you know, we've lost control. I mean, I was, you know, extremely alarmed and disgusted to hear that the thugs that were rioting around Whitehall and Downing Street last night, a lot of them were chanting "Stop the boats."
That's right.
Right now, so this is the other thing is we obviously should stick with Farage, but it's not just Farage and the reform. It's, you know, the Conservative government that just ceased to exist should also look to itself, because, you know, the emphasis on Rwanda, the emphasis on "Stop the boats," Suella Braverman using language of invasion and the extinction level events and all that, that has contributed to this context.
You can take it all the way back to Theresa May's hostile environment.
Right.
And by God, we've got a hostile environment.
We've got one now. And, you know, I'd like to know from Suella Braverman, by the way, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, do they still want Farage in the party? I'd like to hear it. I'd really like to hear that, because what we had here was, I mean, it's not as if we don't know what Farage is like, but this was a sort of public unmasking. Why is he in the Commons? He's in the Commons because not because he wants to win a majority, although I'm sure he would like to in theory, but because he wants to be the chaos agent, the agent of change. He wants to be the person who leaps on any possible pain, tragedy, hurt, disempowerment, resentment, amplify it and turn it into violence. I mean, a lot of people were injured. A lot of police officers, a lot of other people were injured in these riots. Yeah. A lot of blood has been spilt, just in these completely confected
the same people
events
who they were 24 hours before on Twitter lauding the boys in blue and all of this business, protecting our girls against, these fictional invaders, right? The next day, they're throwing bricks at them.
Yeah, I mean...
It's incredible.
There is no logic in it. But what there is, I think, and this is why Farage is the key to it all, is that, you've heard me go on endlessly about network politics as opposed to institutional politics. And I think it's really important to try and understand the importance of these networks and the danger they represent. So let's take an example. So Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief strategist, on stage with Liz Truss at the Conservative Political Action conference last year, in February rather, in Maryland, calls Tommy Robinson a hero on stage with Liz Truss, former Prime Minister, who doesn't lose the Tory whip, by the way. Then, last year we watched at the conference Priti Patel and Farage dancing together. Farage was one of the stars of the conference. Yeah. Farage has been the dominant figure in all this. And what's interesting, though, is I messaged you yesterday about this, is that there's such calculation in what he does, because back in 2018, Farage resigned from UKIP because the then leader, Gerard Batten, recruited Tommy Robinson as an advisor. Yeah. And Farage didn't want to go hard on Islam at that point because he wanted to concentrate on getting Brexit over the line. But since COVID in particular, he's been absolutely, out of the park on Islam, immigration,
this guy
anything.
Is Tommy Robinson in a suit.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Brendan Cox, who said that, I think, was absolutely right. And it's seriously dangerous. And unfortunately, we have let the fox into the chicken coop. Yeah. I mean, what was the election campaign, had two dominant features. One was the collapse of the Conservative Party and the corresponding rise of Labour to a big majority. And the other was this sort of strange seaside pier end show of Farage suddenly emerging as leader of reform, running in Clacton successfully and getting 5 seats, was it? And that there couldn't have been more spotlight upon him. Yeah. And he's now at the very centre. He's got exactly what he wants, which is to be at the very centre of the national debate. And we can see now, I mean, we knew it, but it is now plain as a pikestaff that he is a deeply, deeply dangerous man. This is not just about entertainment. It's not even just about power. It's about he has a serious plan to completely reconfigure this democracy, to destroy the quite old-fashioned traditions of British pluralism.
And it is all about him as well. It's about his personal ambition, I think.
But I do think that the danger is that he appeals to real resentments and real senses of disempowerment, and which actually require incredibly complicated and nuanced solutions over many years.
Well, and also it is, so maybe it's a mistake to, I mean, you can't ignore Farage, right? Someone said, I can't remember who it was on Twitter, someone said, my strategy with Farage is just to not give him the oxygen. But the problem is that the message is being received loud and clear by people who will act on it.
This has always been a silly argument. This oxygen of publicity argument. I mean, it is the job. Our job is to report the news first and foremost, right? And unfortunately, he is the news.
And I'd go a little bit further, and I'd say our job, because also the other myth about what things like you and I do is that we're somehow striving for, a neutral position or a non-partisan take. I'm not. I'm totally fucking partisan against fascism and against far-right nastiness.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a fault of the liberal media where they haven't seen that as a direct mission. Where to fight them fire with fire.
Yes.
I think you have to.
I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, someone saying that journalists should acknowledge that fascism is not just another policy issue like education or health, right?
Yeah.
It is a clear and present danger to what they do for a living and democracy.
Yeah.
And this man represents a very, very great danger to everything we believe in. And it has been a very depressing spectacle to see his success with Brexit then turn into a much bigger campaign.
And what's interesting, I think, just to spell it out, if it's not clear, is that the reason this time it's different and it's obvious and it's clear is that he hasn't changed his MO. His MO has been consistent, right? What's different about this particular incident is he's strapped it onto something where they've got it wrong.
Yes.
Where it's not a guy. It's going to come out where it's not a guy who came across on a boat last year and was being watched by the security services.
Yes.
It's not. It's something else. We don't know what it is yet, but it's something else. And this is how his argument suddenly stands clear as being the criminally divisive and egregiously cynical.
The truth doesn't matter to him. But let me go on further and say, even if it does emerge, which it won't, but let's say hypothetically, as a thought experiment, that it emerged that this 17-year-old had in fact been an asylum seeker. We know he wasn't, but and had been on MI5's watch list. That's no excuse for what he did.
No.
None whatsoever. It basically what he is aggregating to himself in that clip is, it reminds me of Trump saying to Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
That's right.
He's aggregating to himself the power to use social media to trigger violence, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Isabelle Oakshott, right? Who, the partner of
Richard Tice.
Richard Tice, very clever woman, a very interesting character. She put out yesterday a weird thread about almost like trying to justify what had happened. And it was a thread based on a total misconception about contempt of law, reporting laws. She said, recently things have changed. And before this recent change in the law, when someone was arrested, you could say anything you want. You could report anything you want. And then when they were charged, it clamped down. Absolute bollocks. The Contempt of Court Act of 1981 makes it very clear that the moment an arrest is made, proceedings are active, and that means you cannot just write what you've heard because you might prejudice a jury.
In addition to which, he's 17.
And this is why the BBC kept weirdly saying a 17-year-old boy.
Yes.
It's like, here's a clue, folks, as to why we can't name him.
Yeah.
But she then went on to say, of course, as social media, as we all know, social media loves a void and will fill the vacuum with all sorts of things, and it's counter to society's interests that this happens. She's talking about what this guy, the leader of her own party, did. And to sort of set herself up as some sort of sociological advocate for the Marshall McLuhan of far right rioting. To explain how this came about. The hypocrisy of it, when she's part and parcel of it, is utterly sickening.
Well, I mean, I'm glad actually that Starmer we're recording this on Thursday, and he's called in all the top cops for a meeting, and he's clearly laying down the law. I mean, not that they probably need it, but that first and foremost, this is a law and order issue. Yeah. Now we can get to the deep analysis later on, if indeed there is any deep analysis to be made. But this has to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. And it is there are so many things at stake here. First of all, the rule of law, right? This has to stop. And I'm hoping that by the time this goes live on Friday, that it has stopped. But, good on Starmer and good on Yvette Cooper for really being tough on this. But the other thing is the idea of truth, right? Which is that Farage really is an agent of chaos when it comes to information and disinformation. And what this reminded me of when I'd seen that was the Sandy Hook massacre in America, where a horrific thing, Connecticut, 2012, where 20 school kids were shot dead. And the similarity was that Alex Jones, who runs InfoWars, then claimed with no basis at all that the whole thing had been confected. It was a made-up incident, and the people on the scene were crisis actors, as the far right calls it.
Yeah.
And the parents of the dead children have successfully sued Alex Jones.
And bankrupted him.
But it's taken them till now.
Yeah.
So the sort of human cost of these.
And by the way, Matt, even though they've successfully sued him, millions of people still believe
that's the problem.
And there'll be millions of people in 5 years' time who will still believe that this is the result of an asylum-seeking terrorist. You know?
I do not have a glib answer to this, but I do say, we are nowhere near a sort of social settlement on what to do about social media.
Yeah.
Because, like it or not, it is now for a huge number of people their primary source of information about things not in their family, if you like, or their street. And its power is growing. I mean, it's not waning; it's growing. And social media, to any meaningful extent, is controlled by about 5 people, really. Yeah. And nation states and international groups, the EU's been the best of a bad bunch in this, but are nowhere near working out how to regulate it. But we have to find a way of doing it, because, if only to disarm people like Farage.
Yeah.
Because at the moment they have at their disposal a means of communication which enables them to cause mayhem with a single tweet, and that we cannot allow that.
I mean, many people, if they were forced to listen to this podcast, would be screaming at us saying, he's entitled to ask the question. Why can't he ask the question? But the point is, he is not entitled to ask the question if he's a responsible politician.
Yeah, this isn't a freedom.
The question isn't the questions he's flagging up.
Yes.
Say, go look for these questions. It's all very strange, isn't it? Someone said this, someone said that. The questions he's flagging up are from sources he knows are utterly irreputable and evil, frankly.
Yeah.
He's throwing them back into the forum.
I mean, look, you know me, I'm big on free speech, right?
Yeah.
However, I'm not a free speech absolutist, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also of the view that public figures, should be held accountable for the consequences of what they say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to know how the Reform Party, in as much as it exists as a social entity, what are they going to do about the consequences of what that man did on Tuesday?
Yeah.
Is he going to be held accountable in the House of Commons? Are people going to, Jess Phillips, who I like a lot and admire, called him out on X, and there's a silly piece in the Telegraph today saying, "Oh, she shouldn't have done that." Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
You?
Why not? I mean, the argument, the argument, which is
rise above it.
Rise above it. You're inflaming it, and I suspect a measure of sympathy for what Farage was saying. But make no mistake, this is a battle that has to be won, and it is a battle.
Yeah.
Lots of people will say, understandably, "Oh, just let it calm down," and that's, of course, tactically speaking, the right answer. But strategically, this is a war, right? It is a war, and I know you're not supposed to use that sort of language, and apologies for doing so, but I can't think of a better metaphor.
We're in a fight.
We are in a fight. There is a powerful group in this country. I think you described it as the enemy within. Spot on, right? Whose reach is much greater than their numbers, as it were, thanks to modern technology. And they are able to spread mayhem at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
This is simply not tolerable.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, no way. Not having that.
Listen, we're going to have a quick break, and we're going to talk about another
maniac,
appalling maniac. Look, I mean, without getting too kind of virtue signaling. I'm not trying to virtue signal, but I do think we've just ranted now for 25 minutes maybe about Nigel Farage. And as you said right at the top of the show, Matt, there are 3 children dead.
Yes.
There are families mourning. There are 6 or more children still in hospital. There was a very brave yoga teacher who was running the class, critically injured. There was a brilliantly brave businessman who got stabbed in the leg. There was a physical fitness instructor who came in to try and fend off this attacker killing children. Those are the people, I think, who represent Britain.
And, you know, amongst the bit of all this that I found most distressing was that the mother of Elsie Stankham, Jenny, in the midst of the first unbelievable tsunami of grief that lies ahead of her, right, had the courage to go onto social media and say, this is the only thing that I will write, but please stop the violence in Southport tonight. The police have been nothing but heroic these last 24 hours. They and we don't need this. Now, the gap that separates that from that toe rag Farage, in that space, is the battlefield upon which we must prevail.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.